Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is John McLean, and I'm the Sales and Marketing Executive at TruckScience. So this webinar will cover the advantages and disadvantages of adding pusher and tag axles. I will demonstrate how adding axles increases the carrying capacity of a vehicle whilst complying with US federal bridge laws. We will also validate our final build against state regulations to highlight how the weight limits differ between federal and state laws. So to demonstrate the process of modifying a vehicle, I'll take you through a live demo using our axle weight calculator. We'll start with a 6x4 chassis and a 16-foot dump body to demonstrate our baseline carrying capacity. Next, we'll add a pusher axle and compare the new carrying capacity to our baseline vehicle. In step 3, I will increase the wheelbase by 3 feet and show you how axle spacing affects the overall bridge limit and turning radius. And finally, we'll add a second pusher and a longer body to optimize our dump truck. So I'll just switch to the live demo now, but just double checking, Martin, there's no questions at this early stage.
No questions, John, so you can carry on with the demo.
Perfect. Okay, so as I mentioned there, we'll start by selecting from one of these manufacturers for our dump truck example. So I'll choose a Volvo here, VHD 6x4, and we'll go for this one with the 220-inch wheelbase. So this vehicle is already pre-configured with some default dimensions, chassis weights, and axle ratings, but you should always check these values and match them with your proposal document from your chassis supplier. For example, we could start off by changing our wheelbase here just by selecting the override button and toggling it up or down, longer or shorter. We can also change the bogie spread here and the after frame if necessary. So this chassis weighs just over 16,000 pounds. So if you need to make a change to the weights, you can click either the front or the rear axle here and for either menu here for either particular axle. And you can change the weight here if you need, and also the gross axle weight rating. If you're not sure of an input, you can click on the information icons here. So for instance, this says that the gross axle weight rating is the lesser of the manufacturer's axle suspension and tire ratings. So our bridge limit here, I'll just click out of that. Our bridge limit here for the front axle is 20,000 pounds according to the US federal bridge laws. And the permissible maximum for the front axle will be the lesser of the manufacturer's rating and the bridge limit. Therefore, it'll be 14,600 pounds. Now, it is easy to forget about tire spec, but I would recommend that you check the tires, especially the tire width, because this can affect the regulation maximum in certain areas, especially for pusher and tag axles, where we normally run with a single tire fitment. So we can make changes also here to the rear axle and total. And under total here, I am going to make a change to the gross vehicle weight rating. I'm going to override that and change it to 67,600, which the manufacturer has approved for this vehicle. So the permissible maximum will still be the bridge limit here, though, of 51,500 pounds. Okay. Right, once we've set up our vehicle, we're ready to add our body and equipment. But before I do that, I want to give you a quick overview of the dashboard. So here your calculations can be validated against manufacturer limits, regulatory compliance, and organization standards. You can even add your own favorite measurements here. So if I drill down to regulatory compliance, for example, you can see that we are validating against the federal regulations. Okay, so we can now add our body. So I'll choose a body here. I'll go over to our menu and I'll go for a dump body. Here we can add a template if we wanted to, fully customizable body from scratch, or we could go to the public and distributor library to pick a body from an existing manufacturer. So if you're a bodybuilder or equipment manufacturer, and you have dealers or upfitters for your products, then you have the option of setting up your own unique distributor library and approving who has access to your products. But for today's example, I've already used the DXF import feature to add a 16-foot dump body to my personal library. So I'll just go ahead and add that now. And I'll just pull it back a little bit to give a bit of cab clearance there, about 4 inches. Okay, so we'll still need to add a hoist to this as well. So if I go over to my equipment and go to other, I can go to my personal library again. I added this hoist using the template feature, so I can just drag that back also. Okay, so once we've added our body, the software will automatically calculate the permissible payload, which in this case is 23,000 pounds. And it's also shown here down on the weights table. And if you'll notice, the front axle is our limiting factor there. So the front axle has reached like a utilization of 100%, which makes it the limiting factor. So we still have a bit of unused capacity on the rear and also on the total. So if you prefer, you can specify your own payload by overriding it here. And let's say I'll just click that override button and say put it 24,000 pounds. Okay, so we can see there that the front axle is indicating an overload, and there's a red cross next to manufacturer's limits on the dashboard. So at this point, we are exceeding the gross axle weight rating there of 14,600. So since we still have a little bit of unused capacity there on the rear, we could try and shift some of this weight backwards. So I'll grab our body and move it back. So in this position, as I move the body, you'll notice that the axles are all within the limits. So if I move the body even further back, we'll see that we overload our rear axle. But this time we get a red cross next to regulatory compliance. And this is because we are exceeding the bridge limit of 34,000 pounds for the rear tandem. So I'll just go ahead and undo those changes. And I'll unoverride or unfix our payload. So we'll have another look at the utilization on the rear, and we could tweak this calculation a little bit to squeeze a bit more payload out of it. But since we're already utilizing the overall bridge limit up to 90%, there's not much more payload we can really get out of this axle layout. So we've pretty much reached the maximum, although we're not really near that maximum in terms of the gross vehicle weight rating. So now over here, we can see that we can't see the percentage utilization of GVWR. But what we could do is we could add that as a favorite measurement on our dashboard. So I can go ahead and do that by clicking our settings wheel here, going to our favorite measurements and scrolling down. I'll add CDL required as well, actually, to our favorite measurements and explain that in a little bit. So utilization gross as a percentage of GVWR, I'll add that and I'll click OK. So that'll update our dashboard here to show us that the driver will need a commercial driver's license for this vehicle, and that we are only utilizing roughly 70% roughly there of that carrying capacity, gross vehicle weight rating, sorry, of 76,600. So this is a good indication that we can still add axles to the vehicle to increase the overall carrying capacity. So there, just grab a little bit of water here, sorry. So there are a few things to consider when adding axles. So for today's example, we'll focus mainly on the benefits to overall carrying capacity, but we'll also take into account available chassis space and the effect on the turning radius. So to add an axle, we can go up here to our vehicle menu and we'll go to weights and axles and our little plus icon here. So just in cases where the front axle is the limiting factor, where it is in this case, we'll get the most benefit out of adding a pusher axle. That's because the pusher takes some of the load off the front axle. If the rear axle is the limiting factor, we could add either a pusher or tag. In our case, we'll add a pusher because we have sufficient chassis space here. But before I add that in, just keep an eye on that payload there. So we're at 23,000 pounds for the baseline vehicle, the 6x4 vehicle, and our overall carrying capacity is 51,500 pounds. So I'll add that pusher now and just let's see what happens to those figures. Okay, so now that I've added the pusher axle, you'll see that our carrying capacity has increased by 4,500 pounds, and our payload has increased by roughly 6,000 pounds. So the limiting factor is now the tri-axle group on the rear, which is limited to 42,000 pounds, and we're nearing that 100% of our overall bridge carrying capacity. So to see a detailed breakdown of our new bridge limits, we could go up here to the bridge view. Here all the key bridge groups are shown along with distances between axles and permissible bridge limits. So for the outer bridge group from axle 1 to 4, we can see that we have a distance of 21 feet, and that limits us to 56,000 pounds. So to return, I'll just go back to our summary view here. So we've accepted the default values for our pusher axle that we've added. So I'll spend a little more time on the changes that you can make here. So for starters, you can change the position from the driven axle. So you can see here it's defaulted to 49 inches, but you can change that just by clicking it. And you can select your pusher axle here for the menu where you can change these input values for the pusher axle. So I'll just briefly go through these here. So for starters, you could change the weight of the axle, which now is defaulted to 1,350 pounds. The gross axle weight rating of 13,000 pounds. And our bridge limit is 11,600 pounds. So this bridge limit is due to the tyre restriction, specifically 500 pounds per inch of tyre width, which is the minimum that any state can impose on the interstate highway system. You can change your tyres here as well, but I'll get to that in a minute. All right, our permissible limit is therefore 11,600 pounds. And slightly further down, we probably have the most important input value, and that is the percentage of gross weight carried by our pusher axle. You can use this percentage to increase the actual weight that is carried by the pusher axle. So if we look at our weights table here, you can see that the actual the weight at the moment of that pusher is 10,000 pounds. So we're not near that limit of 11,600. But if you wanted to, you can increase this percentage to carry more weight on the pusher axle. So this weight now is defaulted to 24.5%. And that's determined by the ratio between the gross axle ratings of the pusher and the driven axles. So I can make a change to this now. So just keep an eye on that front and rear axle. Just keep an eye on that front and rear axle. As I increase this I'll increase it by maybe about 1%. So if you watch those numbers, you'll notice that the front axle will be slightly lighter, and so will the driven axle. You'll need to experiment with the weight on the pusher axle to get this to an optimum for your application. It takes a little bit of trial and error to get this right. You can increase or decrease the percentages to optimize the distribution over your axles. In practice, you would control this through air pressure in the suspension for the axle, but I'll go back to our default value of 24.5% for now. We can also go to our axle tab here, and we can raise and lower our axle. So if I raise our axle here, you can see that our payload jumps down to 20,000 pounds. And if I raise it, or sorry, if I lower it again, it'll jump up to 30,000 pounds. Of course, we can change the tires, but in this case, it's not even necessary to put on wider tires because we're not fully utilizing the gross axle weight rating of this vehicle. So if we have another look at our dashboard, we'll see that the utilization of the gross vehicle weight rating has increased from about 70% to 80%, but we're still not near that 100%, which indicates that we can still increase our carrying capacity by adding, say, a second pusher axle. So the first consideration will be whether we have enough available chassis space. And it may look like we do initially, but in practice, that depends on the layout of the fuel tank, the def tank, batteries, and the exhaust, which may occupy the space. So to demonstrate, I'll go to our equipment here and I'll add a 75-gallon fuel tank and position it. So I'll grab that and just position it behind the steps there. Okay, so and with that there, now we can see that there won't be enough space to add another pusher axle, and we will need to extend the wheelbase. So there are two ways in which we could increase the wheelbase. The first thing we could do is we go to the swap vehicle feature up here. So if you find a suitable chassis with a longer wheelbase, that chassis could already have appropriate or matching chassis weights for our front and rear axles, so we wouldn't need to do a manual adjustment. In the case where we change the wheelbase manually, we would need to make that change ourselves, and I'll demonstrate that now. But as I'm demonstrating that, I'll also show you the effect on the turning radius. So let's go to the turning radius view here, the smallest turning radius view. Okay, and I'll open this vehicle menu too so I can adjust the wheelbase. So a few things to keep an eye on here while I'm increasing the wheelbase. So keep an eye on the curb to curb turning radius here. It will increase as I increase the wheelbase. You can also take a look at the overall bridge carrying capacity here, which is currently 56,000 pounds. And I'll just increase with the tickers here by 3 feet, which will bring us up to 260 inches. Another one. Yeah, okay, so now you'll notice that the turning radius has increased by about 4 feet, and our overall carrying capacity has increased by about 2,000 pounds. So by default, the pusher axle is a steering axle. And you can go into your pusher here in axle, and you can change that if you want it to a non-steering. But of course, this will have a considerable amount of tire scrub, which is why some regulations make it mandatory for the pusher axle to be a steering axle. So we'll keep it a steering axle for now, and I'll go back to my side view. Okay, so obviously we need to change that body, but I'll do that in a second. So we should adjust the chassis weight for the extension of the wheelbase. So the manual way of doing this would be just to go to our front axle chassis weight there and increase it by about 100 pounds. And we can do the same to the rear. Your chassis supplier can probably give you more accurate values for the changes to the wheelbase. At this point, it is a little bit of an estimate, but roughly 200 to 300 pounds for the extra 3 feet of chassis length should be sufficient, and it is something we checked with the manufacturer in this case. Okay, so this body is no longer suitable, so I'm going to remove this body and replace it with a 19.5 foot dump body. That I have in my personal library also. And again, I'll just drag that back and do the same with our hoist. Yeah. Okay, so now we are ready to add our second pusher axle because we've got enough space for it there. So I'll go back to our vehicle menu, go to axles and weights, and our little plus icon there again. So again, keep an eye on that overall carrying capacity, which at the moment is 58,000 pounds, and also our payload there, 23, and we'll see how they are adjusted. So we'll add our second pusher in. Okay, so we can see when I add the pusher, we get an increase of about 5,000 pounds there to 63,000 pounds, and our payload is now 36,000 pounds. So looking at our dashboard, the overall utilization uh, of the gross vehicle weight rating is now 93%. So we're pretty close to that 100%. But this is as far as we'll go in terms of modifying our dump truck. So comparing this to the original 6x4 version, our overall carrying capacity has now increased by 11,500 pounds and our payload has increased by 13,000 pounds. So this shows just how beneficial it is to add lift axles to our vehicle. Okay, so all right, up until now, we've validated this calculation against the federal regulations. What we'll do now is change this to see how it will perform on the Idaho state roads. So a way we can do this now is go back to our settings and we can remove the US regulations, federal regulations, and I can type in Idaho. I'll go for our state roads. I'll deal with the interstate roads in a minute. We'll just start with the state roads and press OK to that. Okay, so now here on our weights table, you'll notice that the overall bridge carrying capacity is increased by about 5,000 pounds. That is because Idaho applies its own bridge formula on state roads, which is considerably higher than what will be allowed in the interstate highway system. Our payload has now increased also by about 5,000 pounds to nearly 41,000 pounds. If we have a look at our axles here, you'll notice that Idaho also allows slightly higher weights on the tandems. So that's 37,800 pounds instead of the normal 34,000 pounds. The pusher axles can go all the way up to 13,000 pounds because Idaho allows 600 pounds per inch of tire width. And all right, yeah, we've utilized 100% of the gross vehicle weight rating as well. So let's assume this vehicle also needs to travel on the interstate. So what I can do here is I can validate against both state and interstate regulations. Just before I do that though, I'll lock down our payload here to prevent the software from recalculating it when I add the second regulation. So I can go back to settings here and I'll go to Idaho again and pop in interstate and click OK for that. Okay, and I'll just click into regulatory compliance. Okay, so it's interesting here. So you'll notice that the vehicle will be legal on state roads, but overloaded on interstate, hence the red cross here. So we applied the lowest weight limits to the weights table here, so which takes us back to 63,000 pounds for the overall carrying capacity. So for this vehicle to be legal on both state and interstate roads, what we could do is deselect that overridden payload to allow the software to calculate the maximum permissible payload again, and that should be 36,000, yeah, 36,000 pounds. And we should get our green ticks for both. And you were able to validate your calculation against up to 5 different regulations at once. That's actually the end of the live demo. And I know, sorry if I went a little bit quick through certain parts of it, but there's time now for a few questions, Martin, if there's anything we can help people with.
Yes, John, thanks. I'll maybe just start with the first question
Yeah.
that came in earlier on. There was a question to ask if we could just talk a little bit about twin steer axles for Canadian specs, specifically for Quebec and the Western provinces, and also for these twin steer vehicles to include lift axles. Now, I did explain that this webinar is focusing mainly on configurations for the US market, but that we did do a webinar specifically for our Canadian customers last week, where we did include an example on a twin steer vehicle. And we can send you a link to that webinar recording.
Yeah.
And if anybody else would like that link, please let us know in the questions there as well, and we can provide that link. We won't do an actual demo of that right now, but just to mention that specifically, Quebec requires that, say, the second steer axle is steered by the driver. Hence, a twin steer vehicle is required for that, and a self-steering pusher axle, for example, would not work. The lift axle was not specifically covered in that webinar, but we are always happy to do one-on-one screen share sessions to work through your specific questions and requirements. And I have offered this person that link. And if anybody else would like to set up a one-on-one screen share session, please let us know and we can do that as well. John will mention that again towards the end.
Yeah.
And then there was another question just now. Is there a recommended minimum percentage of weight to keep on the front axle? As far as I know, there is no minimum percentage by regulated minimum percentage, at least not in the US states. However, some regulations, and especially the regulations in Canada, for example, in Ontario, for a vehicle with a pusher axle, that would be a 4-axle vehicle, there is a minimum requirement of either 19% or 23%, depending on the vehicle type. So it does vary again, but the sort of common percentage that we've seen is around about 20%, but that is obviously influenced by the number of axles on the vehicle. In this case, we've got 5 axles on this vehicle, so that may mean that a slightly lower percentage would be acceptable, but somewhere around 20% is quite common. Let's just see if there are any other questions. There are no other questions at the moment, John, so you can continue there.
Okay, I'll go back to my slides, but please feel free to ask any questions, because we can always just go back to the app if we need. Okay, so to sum up, here are a few things to consider when adding pusher and tag axles. So to start, the manufacturer's gross vehicle weight rating must be adequate for the additional weight. You can talk to your local chassis supplier to confirm the gross vehicle weight rating and that the vehicle is suitable for adding more axles. Next, you'll need to choose between pusher and tag axles. You will need to consider how each affects weight distribution. The final position of the axles will also be affected by the wheelbase and the available chassis space. If you have to increase the wheelbase to accommodate additional axles, you will need to determine the effect on the turning radius and to decide whether the axles need to be steering. You'll also need to consider the required gross axle weight rating and the tire size for your additional axles. Your choice will be driven by the application and the regulations under which the vehicle will operate. To get the optimum balance of weight over the axles, you should test a few scenarios to work out how much weight each pusher or tag axle needs to carry and how to set up the air pressure in the suspension to achieve the required weight. And lastly, and very importantly, you need to understand how overall carrying capacity is affected by federal and state regulations in the area where the vehicle operates. You'll remember that there was a difference of about £5,000 between federal regulations and other state laws. So for our quad axle dump truck, I've used our axle weight calculator to work through these examples today. So if you would like to try the app yourself, please visit truckscience.com to register for a fully functional free trial. You'll be up and running in under just a few minutes. And Martin, just before I end the webinar, just double checking there's no more questions.
There are no additional questions, John.
Okay. So I'll end the webinar shortly, but before you go, please rate the webinar and leave any comments or questions you'd like to share. And as Martin was saying there, if you'd like to set up a personalized demo of the app, you can leave your contact details in the comments and we'll gladly set that up for you. So thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to your feedback and goodbye.